Ghost of Tsushima has the difficult task of closing out the PS4 era of exclusive gaming that has seen a number of classics throughout its lifetime. Even before the main credits rolled, it was clear that not only does Sony have another classic under their belt, but the torch is honorably being passed to the next generation, leaving big shoes to be filled in the process. Welcome to Rugged Pro Gaming, where I display a live representation of my review score, which will increase or decrease in tandem with my verbal pros and cons.
Cowards without honor deserve no mercy. No mercy!
Ghost of Tsushima opens up with the Mongolian army invading Tsushima Island in their quest to eventually conquer the mainland of Japan. You play as the honorable samurai Jin Sakai, and along about 80 other samurai you attempt to stop the invasion, but fail miserably due to the Mongols' overwhelming forces. Without spoiling the story, you're pretty much left for dead and strike out on a mission of revenge, redemption, reflection, and a bunch of other powerful R words that all coexist with one another. The story is split into 3 different acts which all almost play as their own narrative, but weaves together into one complete conclusion. Remember learning about plot structure in like 8th grade English class? You know, the charts that show exposition, conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Yeah, well, each act follows that thing, and it leads you through the story in a way where it never really dulls or loses traction. At the end of each act, I felt like I've reached the end of a movie that had an upcoming sequel. Think Lord of the Rings. The main goal was to destroy the ring, but throughout the trilogy there were many more events that occurred which eventually led to the finale. In Ghost of Tsushima, those events are told through tales, which are essentially side quests given by different allies. Each ally has a different set of quests, all with their own personal storyline that ties into the main campaign. These optional tales are very well done, ranging from finding an expert archer that is turned traitor for the Mongols, or helping an ally find the people responsible for killing their entire family. They all fit right into the ongoing narrative of the story and never felt out of place, especially in the first act of the game, which sees you gaining the trust of allies to create a resistance against the Mongols, more specifically their leader, Khotun Khan. Khan is your typical video game villain. He's easily unlikable and has motives that are essentially evil at his deepest roots. He's willing to sacrifice the lives of innocents to achieve his purpose, and his methods are consistently vicious. He doesn't have any kind of backstory, however, no character development or anything expressively interesting about him. He's just a big, angry, strong, mean man with big stick, which makes his presence somewhat stale as a whole. As a main antagonist, defeating Khan is largely the overarching conflict between all 3 acts. Sucker Punch aims at deepening the story elements through Jin's character development on your path to ultimately facing Khan, while also navigating through the necessary sacrifices that are met along the way. You watch Jin witness the world around him crumble as he attempts to win a seemingly unwinnable war, but as the game goes on, it becomes clear that the Mongols aren't his biggest enemy. Jin is essentially his own worst enemy, as he begins to battle with himself, trying to uphold the honorable way of the samurai that was instilled within him at a very young age. He was taught to always look his enemy in the eye when in battle, and never to quietly kill or kill from behind. Code he wants to follow, but realizes in doing so he can't succeed. This is in fact his biggest sacrifice, having to free himself from his honor in order to save his home and his people. Seeing Jin battle his own demons immersed me further into the narrative, and I developed a connection with him because his conflict was believable and his reasoning was genuine. I'd like to think of myself as a pretty honorable kind of guy. You know, if I see a mugging, I'd probably intervene. So I wanted to uphold Jin's honor as much as I could, but as you progress through the story and the more you use stealth, the more the world negatively reacts to you, as people begin to see your samurai honor slip away. This reactive mechanic was a huge opportunity to allow players to alter the course of the story based upon their approach to gameplay, and the game actually somewhat hints that this is the direction that the game is leading to, but unfortunately it's just smoke and mirrors. There's a false sense of choice when it comes to playing honorably or not, going as far as the game showing occasional flashbacks of being taught about honor after you silently assassinate someone.
Jin. We look them in the eye with courage. Only cowards strike from the shadows.
Forgive me, Uncle.
You begin to feel like your actions have some kind of consequences toward the story, but eventually the cat is let out of the bag and the game forces you to complete stealthy missions which fail if you attempt it otherwise. You are destined to become the stealthy Ghost of Tsushima. The only issue I have with this is that some of your allies whine and complain about your tactics even when you're saving lives or weakening the enemy. The end result doesn't matter to them at all, which made the verbal conflicts feel less believable. I honestly wish I had the choice to just stop using stealth altogether just to literally shut them up. But then it hit me. I never knew that samurai were literally Klingons that were raised in Japan, but it all makes perfect sense. I wasn't the Ghost of Tsushima. I was Worf of Kronos, being labeled as dishonorable while doing more honorable work than anyone else. But with all that being said, the game did still have an interesting enough story that made me want to see it through to the end. The island of Tsushima is one of, if not the most beautiful environments I have ever had the pleasure of playing in. If you disagree with that statement, it's likely you've engaged in more than a few keyboard wars about PC gaming and numerous comment sections at some point in your life. But even if you do own a powerful PC, it's hard to ignore the level of amazing detail that Sucker Punch managed to deliver. I put a ton of hours into the game and the awe factor lasted the entire way through. No matter how many times I rode horseback through colorful forests, sat atop of a mountain to admire the horizon, or just relax near a spring listening to the water flow in between my ankles. There was something always grabbing my attention. Even in the middle of an invasion, the island still speaks to you, inviting you to stop and appreciate its beauty, which is nothing short of heavenly. Sucker Punch was well aware of what they achieved in terms of visual seduction, and it's evident that they wanted players to feel as if they were vacationing in the island, most notably by the extremely limited heads-up display. The HUD is almost non-existent, allowing you to soak in your surroundings without being interrupted by on-screen distractions. When switching stances or equipping weapons, you'll get some visual guidance, but that quickly disappears to get your immersion right back on track. For fans of vintage black and white films, specifically that of Akira Kurosawa, there's a mode named in his honor that can be toggled on or off, which transports the game back into 1940s cinema. Now, this wasn't my preferred way to play, but watching cutscenes in this style was always enjoyable. I only wish there was a way to switch to this mode while in the middle of cutscenes. It added a nice sound profile to the conversations.
For generations, our families have lived by a code. Tell me the virtues that guide us.
Loyalty to our Lord, control of our emotions, and...
You know this.
Altogether, the presentation of the island is a nice glimpse at what we can expect from next generation gaming later in the year. But where the game stumbled a bit visually was the characters. During most cutscenes, the character models looked great. They were highly detailed and they really felt alive. When in gameplay, however, the characters just don't match up with the rest of the game visually. It's heavily apparent inside of the photo mode. Get too close to Jin and he can look pretty off. This is a nitpick, however. The character models aren't bad, they just pop out like a pimple on your dream girl's face. But even with the pimple, she's still pretty though. You know what I mean?
Samurai! Bastin Chamak!
Playing as Jin Sakai just simply never gets old. You'll never feel winded or fatigued, and that in itself is a major accomplishment. There's no energy drink required when playing this game, even into the late hours of the night. It's successful largely due to the nearly intimidating amount of customization and also a map that is stacked with activities and quests that all directly benefit your character build. What I mean by that is that everything you do doesn't just net you some XP like most games, but they also affect things such as your maximum health, resolve, which is what you use in order to do special attacks, grant charms for stat boosts, and some activities even give you pieces of special gear. The game is quick to show you the super badass war machine Jin can become, and when starting out you're sure to just window shop the abilities and plan how you'll spend your future technique points to best fit your character build. The great thing is that the technique points are plentiful, so you'll eventually be able to experiment with different playstyle options as you continue to progress. It remains consistently fresh, and just when you think you've seen all there was to offer, the game gives you a new attack or a new item to use against enemies, and these surprises keep coming. With this in mind, you'll become completely invested at doing all that the game has to offer. But for all of the skills and the gear there is to unlock and find, it would all feel unnecessary if the combat sucked. Thankfully, it's a super satisfying challenge that always keeps you on your toes. The combat can be pretty brutal. It only takes a couple of false moves and you're done for, so you really have to pay attention to your enemy and practice timing and execution, or you'll end up dead and fast. But to avoid death, the game encourages you to use your arsenal to the fullest, and the amount of options you have at your disposal allows you to play in your own personal way. Do you want to be a shock and awe kind of guy and enter camps with smoke bombs while throwing sticky bombs? Slowly pick off enemies headshot after headshot with your bow and arrow? Or maybe you just want to silently assassinate everything in sight. You can play by your own means and build your character up to fit your specific playstyle. Regardless of how you choose to play, the combat remains fluid and enjoyable. The only negative about the combat is that there isn't any indication as to where enemies are off screen. This can lead to you getting shot by an archer you didn't even know was around, or leaving you to spin the camera around trying to find remaining enemies, which halts the action. When not fighting off a group of Mongols, I find myself plundering through tents and homes looking for any crafting components I could find, because the crafting is super easy, super simple, and super effective. Sucker Punch took one of the most complicated mechanics in RPGs and streamlined it in a way that was easy to pick up and never confusing. They did this by not oversaturating the amount of components needed to craft upgrades, so each time I found a resource, I knew exactly what it could be used for and how it was beneficial to me. For example, if you wanted to upgrade your bow, there are only 4 resources you'll ever need. Supplies, which work pretty much as the game's currency, bamboo, yew wood, or waxwood. These woods were only for bow upgrades, and every time I picked one up, I knew I was getting closer to upgrading one of my bows. The same exact thing goes for your sword, your armor, your ammo capacity, and the other upgradable items. Everything has its own small set of required resources. Games like Dragon Age or Witcher 3 are loaded with a ton of nonsense when crafting weapons, armors, and other items. I'm usually just picking crap up not knowing how it would benefit me, but just hoping it would come in handy later. Now, and don't get me wrong, I love those games, but it's frustrating when you want to create a nice piece of gear only to find out that you need Virgin Mary's mother milk and Donald Trump Cheeto dust to do so. Role-playing games should take notes. This is how you do crafting systems right. People shouldn't have to rely on Google or walk through guides in order to know where to find specific resources. But one thing I wish Ghost of Tsushima did as good as other games is traversal. Climbing and jumping around never felt smooth, and I never felt confident that I wasn't going to fall to my death. It feels like a slightly updated version of what Sucker Punch used in their infamous titles, but it's kind of hard to explain. I guess it feels kind of magnetized. Like if you jump slightly to the left of an object, the game will gently suck you to the right. It caused me to feel out of control, and sometimes these invisible magnets just don't seem to work. When climbing shrines, I've came across jumps that I executed the same each time, but died after the first few attempts because the game didn't allow me to grab what I was aiming for. Also at times some stone faces appear as surfaces you can land on, but you glide off of them and die. Now, this didn't bother me too much, however, because luckily the penalty for death is almost non-existent and the game loads up almost instantly, starting you right back where you left off. What did bother me was how difficult it is to drop off of ledges. If I wanted to just walk off a ledge, it was almost like there was an invisible wall blocking me, or those magnets were keeping me tethered onto the ledge. This wasn't just in place to keep you from walking off deadly cliffs, because this issue happened when I just wanted to drop 1 foot down. In tight situations during stealth, this made staying undetected unnecessarily difficult. At times I would be spotted because I couldn't drop into tall grass quick enough. This is also something that could easily be fixed in a patch, but as it stands right now, the traversal falls pretty flat.
Bruh. I've seen enough. Let's go.
As a Ghost of Tsushima, there's a ton of inventory and abilities that you have to manage, and unfortunately things can get a bit clunky. The game offers up so much potential in making Jin a super badass war machine that you can occasionally get lost in all of the upgrading options and customizable gear you have access to. This might sound like a good problem, and honestly in a lot of ways it is, but for some, the overwhelming amount of content and somewhat confusing menu doesn't do the game many favors. There are 2 skill trees, 4 upgradable stances, 5 upgradable ghost weapons, 5 exploration upgrades, 7 evolving tactics. If that sounds like a lot, it's because it is. Not to mention the insane amount of stat boosting charms, armor, masks, hats, sword kits, bow kits. The list is huge, and it's a difficult task to neatly bundle up these options in an easy to access way. The charms, for example, are plentiful, and you'll eventually have duplicates and other charms that are specific to certain playstyles, but there's no way to sort through them. You have to go through them all one by one to find what you're looking for, which can be a time-consuming task. This is something that can be fixed in the update, but as for right now, the customization menus remain a maze. For dedicated players though, you'll eventually figure out the menu and be able to navigate through it efficiently. But no matter how many hours I played, accessing my weapons during combat was something I was never able to master. For example, if you wanted me to tell you how to equip the wind chime and then switch to the sticky bomb, I couldn't accurately tell you without fumbling through the controls first. Again, the issue with the weapon selection is that Sucker Punch wants to make Jin a super badass war machine. That being said, Jin has access to all of his weapons at once, and with the amount of weapons he has, swapping between them is button mapping hell. Almost every weapon is mapped to the same button as another weapon, but you have to follow a determined button path to get to the layout for the weapon you want to equip. Does that sound confusing? Good, because there isn't a way to explain it without confusing yourself. There's a throw section that houses weapons you have to literally throw, such as wind chimes, firecrackers, or explosive bombs. But then there are also things that can be thrown, such as sticky bombs and kunai knives. But these items are tucked away in a separate section. It takes a completely different path to access them. It's confusing to remember where each item lies and how to get to it quickly. I can change my stance quickly as well as changing my bow and ammo type. I've mastered that. But getting to my knives, smoke bombs, wind chimes, and so on was like tearing through a glove department looking for some old ass vehicle registration. The best way to fix this is to just limit players to what they have equipped at once. Choose a bow and maybe 2 throwing objects and that problem will be solved. Allowing us to have our entire arsenal on hand is great, especially when clearing out a ton of enemies, but it causes so much confusion it ends up being bittersweet. As one generation ends and a new one is set to begin, it's still an amazing time to be a PS4 owner. Sony has blessed the PS4 with a ton of amazing exclusives, and Ghost of Tsushima will close out one of the best generations in Sony gaming history with a nearly flawless farewell that should be experienced by gamers everywhere. All jokes aside, this is a must play, must buy, must own, must experience, must go and get right now if you haven't already. You owe it to yourself. It's an instant classic.